Hi, I'm Ollie. Welcome to Possibility Space. Today I'm going to read you, why does anybody believe the IDF anymore? Israel, laughably, refer to their military as the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF. Despite their name, they habitually invade countries, commit war crimes, and then try to cover them up. Here are 3 recent examples. While I'm reading these, please try to hold the acronym DARVO in your mind. That's DARVO. It stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse Victim and Offender. It's used to describe a pattern of behavior often used by perpetrators in abusive relationships to deflect blame and responsibility for their actions. The first example we're going to look at is the assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh. An IDF sniper shot and killed journalist Shireen Abu Akleh on the 11th of May, 2022. The sniper could fully read her press vest when he shot her. Witnesses reported without delay and accurately that Israeli forces had carried out the shooting. Media outlets, human rights organizations, the United Nations, they all supported this claim. Israel, predictably, sought to evade responsibility. The Palestinians did it, they claimed, tweeting a video of Palestinian gunmen. Israeli human rights group B'Tselem quickly debunked this video. They showed it was filmed at a completely different location. Then, Israel decried, quote, hasty accusations as, quote, misleading and irresponsible. Their supporters in the media wrongly painted Israel as the true victim. They called the accusations blood libel and anti-Semitic. Israel's DARVO tactics worked. The New York Times and The Guardian played it safe by wrongly attributing Abu Akleh's death to, quote, clashes between, quote, Israeli military forces and Palestinian gunmen. The Associated Press even changed a quote from the Palestinian Ministry of Health so that it no longer named Israeli forces as the culprit. Western media framed Israel's actions as a justified response to Palestinian, quote-unquote, terrorism. They portrayed Abu Akleh's death as a tragic accident instead of what it actually was, a deliberate assassination of a journalist. This narrative allowed the Biden administration to support Israel's lie, despite internally concluding that the IDF was the culprit. The IDF demanded that only a small number of mourners, and only Christians at that, yes, they have apartheid for funerals as well, attended Abu Akleh's funeral. Then they attacked it, smashing the back window of the hearse and stealing the Palestinian flag that covered Abu Akleh's coffin. Kicking and hitting people with batons, the IDF forced mourners carrying her coffin to lose their balance and drop it to the ground. While this occurred, the BBC, CBS, and others reported mere clashes and tussling. This was despite overwhelming visual evidence of Israeli occupation forces attacking mourners in broad daylight. The Daily Mail even credulously reported that, quote, Israeli cops say they intervened in funeral of Al Jazeera journalist because mobs stole coffin from her family. Abu Akleh wasn't the first Palestinian to be persecuted in death, nor was she the last. Months later, when the world had looked away, Israel admitted that there was a, quote, high possibility that Miss Abu Akleh was accidentally hit by IDF gunfire. They still refused to open a criminal investigation. Even if they did open an investigation, the odds of a prosecution would be slim to none. A meager 0.17 of all incidents of IDF wrongdoing reviewed by their, quote, fact-finding mechanism result in prosecution. By comparison, the system that Israel uses to prosecute Palestinians has a 99.7% prosecution rate. The purpose of a system is what it does. Next, we're going to move on to another example of the IDF lying. This one's the flower massacres. Israeli forces often shoot Palestinians trying to get food from aid trucks. These events happen so often that we have a name for them: flower massacres. Last month, about 600 desperately hungry Palestinians were killed in this way. None of this is accidental. Israeli soldiers have been explicitly ordered to shoot civilians at aid sites. This hasn't stopped them trying to evade accountability, though. They kill and lie faster than I can debunk. So we're only going to examine one crime here. The Flower Massacre of June 1st, 2025, in which Israel killed at least 31 people. First, they denied their crime, saying, quote, "It simply didn't happen." Then they changed their story. The Palestinians did it, they claimed. This might seem familiar. Tweeting a video of unidentified gunmen. Dropsite News quickly debunked this video, showing that it was filmed at an entirely different location. The video could be of any armed group in Gaza. Perhaps the ISIS-affiliated militia that Israel has recently bragged about training and arming. The IDF then attacked their accusers. This report is entirely false and echoes the propaganda of the terrorist organization Hamas, they said. They also tried to blame their victims for their own deaths. They designated the scene of the crime a no-go zone after they'd started shooting. They then used the fact that their victims were in said zone to blame them for their own deaths. This is a well-documented and common IDF practice. Israel's Darvo tactics had a visible chilling effect at the BBC. They softened their language from, quote, 31 dead after Israeli tank opens fire near Gaza Aid Center. Seems pretty straightforward to me. 2. Israel denies firing at civilians after Hamas-run ministry says 31 killed in Gaza Aid Center attack. There are conflicting reports on what happened near an aid distribution center in Rafah on Sunday. So what happened here? Israel scolded the BBC, and the corporation responded by softening its coverage. There's a lesson here for anybody who runs a media organization. Do not give an inch to these genocidal maniacs. Israel recently announced a huge 20-fold increase in their propaganda budget. They call this their consciousness warfare budget. So editors need to learn this lesson quickly, otherwise they're going to be absolutely swamped by smears. 4 days later, CNN put the BBC to shame. They clearly showed what anyone paying attention already knew. Israel did commit the massacre and tried to hide it. The IDF were caught in a lie, again. But their damage control strategy had worked. The eyes of the world had already moved on. Our third and final example is the Rafah paramedic massacre. Israel has killed hundreds of health and aid workers since their genocide began. They massacre and misrepresent faster than I can clarify. So again, we're only going to examine one crime here. The paramedic massacre of March the 23rd, 2025, in which Israel killed at least 15 aid workers. Israel went to great lengths to literally bury the truth of what happened. They hid the bodies and the bullet-ridden ambulances in one mass grave of contorted flesh and metal. Then they blocked access to it. They also kidnapped one eyewitness and killed another, a 12-year-old boy. With the witnesses taken care of, they claimed that the paramedics they killed were actually, quote, terrorists in suspicious vehicles who were advancing towards troops without use of headlights or emergency signals. UN officials from the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, tried to get to the crime scene. On their way, OCHA officials bore witness to the cheapness of Palestinian life. The IDF shot 2 more civilians right in front of them. OCHA were then denied access to the site. 2 weeks after the massacre, new footage emerged. It contradicted Israel's version of events. Headlights and emergency signals were visible. Terrorists were not. Investigators who had finally gained access to the gravesite found this footage on the phone of one of the victims. The IDF had buried it with his body. Also buried with the bodies were cable ties. These indicate that the paramedics were tied up and killed execution style, clearly posing no threat. No wonder the IDF had so fiercely guarded the gravesite. With this video out in the open, the IDF finally acknowledged that its first account was, quote, mistaken. It still insists that the ambulances were used for terrorist purposes. No one has ever presented evidence to support that claim. On the other hand, there's plenty of evidence that the IDF perfidiously disguises themselves as aid workers to launch attacks. Every accusation, it appears, is a confession. Addressing the fact that they hid the bodies in the mass grave, they said this was to prevent wild dogs eating the corpses. This is sadly commonplace in the hellscape that Israel has turned Gaza into. The IDF chose not to answer the obvious follow-up question. Did you think the dogs would eat the ambulances that you buried too? Even now, if you say Israel killed those aid workers, they call it blood libel. And this tactic works. Sky News reported, long after the facts had all emerged, that, quote, we don't know why Israel, quote, detained eyewitness paramedic Assad al-Nasra. Why would the perpetrator of a crime kidnap a witness? We haven't the foggiest, apparently. So, why does anyone believe the IDF anymore? There are too many horrors to count, but I hope the examples above sufficiently plot the trend. Israel lies, Palestinians die, and the Western media let them. Indeed, it doesn't matter how many times we catch Israel in a lie. Western media continues to treat their claims as credible. It's like a perverse Groundhog Day. When reporting on Israel's mass murder campaign, passive voice is king, omitting facts is standard, and fabrication is permissible in newspapers that read like total caricatures of themselves. They muddle, mislead, and misconstrue, manufacturing consent for genocide and creating confusion around murders that are clear as day. When it comes to Palestine, the industry that claims to speak truth to power is really just a loudspeaker for the powerful. So why is this? Well, you could write a book on that, and many have, but I'm British and short on time, so we're only going to examine one institution here, the BBC. We saw earlier how belligerent foreign states and their friends in the media pressure the BBC. The corporation is also disciplined by British politicians. Former Chancellor George Osborne recently admitted as much. Quote, you think of the BBC as being this big, independent organisation with lots of protection against the government of the day, but the Chancellor can basically boss the BBC around. An open letter from 112 BBC journalists and 306 media figures revealed that BBC staff are forced by the organisation's pro-Israel leadership to, in their own words, perform PR for the Israeli government. The letter calls on the BBC to sack Sir Robbie Gibb, who is Theresa May's former spin doctor. He was a Tory-appointed BBC director, and he currently sits on the BBC's board and its editorial standards committee. Gibb bought the Jewish Chronicle, a racist, pro-Israel paper that regularly prints falsehoods. He made the purchase on behalf of an anonymous consortium. To this day, he refuses to say who gave him the money. BBC journalists note that, quote, this conflict of interest highlights a double standard for BBC content makers who have themselves experienced censorship in the name of impartiality. In some instances, staff have been accused of having an agenda because they posted news articles critical of the Israeli government on their social media. By comparison, Gibb remains in an influential post with little transparency regarding his decisions, despite his ideological leanings being well known. We can no longer ask license fee payers to overlook Gibb's ideological allegiances. I've used the BBC as a case study here, but journalists everywhere face similar interference when they report facts about Israel. So, to finally answer the question I posed at the top, no, nobody actually believes the IDF anymore. Western journalists just pretend to because they're rewarded for doing so and punished when they don't. Thank you for listening. I hope you found that interesting and insightful. Possibility Space is a listener-supported publication. Feel free to subscribe wherever you're listening to this. Pop us a great rating. You can also subscribe on Substack if you want to become a paid supporter. Thanks a lot for your time. Have a great day. See you next time.